Hey there guys, welcome back to Tech Radar. 2019 is coming to a close and indeed the end of the decade as well. So I thought I would take around my camera and interview as many of the Tech Radar staff as I could about their highlights and disappointments of the decade. So here is that video. I hope you enjoy and we will see you in 2020.
So I've been working on TechRadar's for the entire decade, and a lot of that was for this phones editor, except my highlight of the decade isn't actually a phone. It's the HTC Vive VR. It was just incredible when I first saw it in 2015. So we were promoted by HTC for their new phone. At the end of it, they said, oh, you should try this as well. This is a VR headset that can track you in real time. And that was the key part. Not just being able to move your head around and see different things, to move in space. It was just incredible. We're talking very basic demos, small little guns on like pirate ships and a whale that you could go and look at, but even then it was just amazing. And 5 years on, the HTC Vive is still going. We've got the Cosmos. I still believe in VR. I still think it can be a good thing, but that moment in 2015 was where it all shifted. So in trying to choose my disappointment of the decade, there's actually quite a lot of choice because a lot of people have done some very bad things. Looking at you, Amazon with the Fire Phone. But if we're talking about the biggest disappointment for me, it's something that hasn't actually failed. It's Apple's Siri. Now, we know it's not a bad product. You can do quite a lot of stuff with Siri. It can control your lights. It can help you start things up. And on the whole, it's generally quite good, but it still isn't perfect. And with a company like Apple making something like Siri, and it's been going at it for so many years, I want it to be absolutely flawless. I want every single thing that I say to be picked up absolutely accurately. I want my AirPods to know what I want to say when I want to say it. And I want my HomePod to turn off my lights every single time I want it to. That's still not happened, and I think the 20s is going to be the time that that gets fixed.
Hey Siri, show me my life goals list.
I found 10 reminders.
My tech highlight of the decade was the DJI Spark because it really changed our expectations of what you could expect from a £500 drone. I remember being particularly blown away by features like Active Track and the return to home function, which kind of showed that it's good software that really makes a great gadget. My tech disappointment of the decade was the MakerBot's Replicator, or 3D printers in general. I remember being really excited to get the first 3D printer in the office in 2012, but after hours of fiddling with the extruder nozzle and aborting prints, I was kind of left with a pile of stringy ABS plastic. I should probably have just looked at how bad paper printers are to lower my expectations a little bit.
My tech highlight of the decade has probably been the Nintendo Switch, just because it's quite a simple concept, but Nintendo pulled it off so well. The idea that you can take a console and dock it in your home and have it as like a home entertainment system, but also take it on the go with you and essentially make it a handheld. It is simple, but nobody else has pulled it off and nobody else probably will pull it off. On the flip side of that, Nintendo was also my biggest disappointment of the decade because the Wii U was not great. Anyone who had a Wii U has probably now put it in like the dusty cupboard somewhere and will leave it there until the remainder of time just to remind them how disappointing it was. It didn't sell well, and now it's just going to be a blotch forever on their pretty good record. So yeah, Nintendo has been good and bad this decade, but they finished it off pretty good.
My highlight for 2020 is probably just OLED televisions. We've seen prices come down a lot in the last 12 months, whether that's the LG B9 Hisense 08B or the Philips OLED 754. We're seeing manufacturers really gun for that mid-range, mid-price area for OLEDs, and I think 2020 is just going to be better. My disappointment, and I don't want to be too harsh here, but it's probably going to be Google Stadia. I think the video game streaming platform has a lot of potential, but as a platform that launches essentially in beta with games at full price and quite a meager lineup to start, I think it's a difficult proposition for many of us to follow. A sort of cheaper entry point, especially while people are taking quite a big punt on this platform, wouldn't have gone amiss.
My tech highlight of the decade is actually the same as my tech disappointment of the decade, and that's virtual reality. So earlier on this decade, we had the rise of Palmer Luckey, a really sort of plucky, upstart, crowd-funded VR guru who brought us the Oculus Rift. And from that, there was this promise of like the potential for virtual worlds that we can all stand in and play, and that kind of matrix level of immersion. What we've ended up with is more a patchwork of ideas and hardware that hasn't quite lived up to that potential, really. There's been a few good games, there's been a few good ideas around immersive experiences, but a lot of it has been commercial as opposed to home-based stuff. There's been some success stories. Oculus Quest is very good, and that's the first really capable wireless headset from Microsoft. It's taken a long time to get there, but that's good. PlayStation's commitment to VR gaming has given us some really great experiences as well, like Batman VR, Blood and Truth, really positive. There's still hope for VR, but in terms of it being a mass market, mass appeal product, which is what it needs to be if you're going to keep getting that kind of high level investment, I'm not sure it's really reached that height yet.
My biggest tech success of the decade was the Samsung Galaxy Fold. Yes, it only came out in 2019, right at the end, but my word, have smartphones basically been the same since 2010 till now. The Galaxy Fold really has changed the landscape and makes me really excited for the next decade. It's a folding phone, hence the name Fold, and it is just like a little bit of science fiction in your hand. It's not a perfect device, it's very expensive, but it's the sign of things to come, and that's why I'm excited. However, my biggest disappointment of the decade has been any mobile operating system which isn't iOS or Android. How have we seen so many operating systems try and fail to make a mark on the mobile landscape in the last 10 years? Likes of BlackBerry 10, Windows Phone, Firefox OS, and lots more. All have come, promised the world, delivered half, and then ultimately failed, usually due to a lack of apps, but a variety of other factors too. So to all those mobile OSs who tried and sort of failed, this one goes out to you.
My highlight of the decade is dark mode. Obviously it's been around for a long time and it does in fact predate this decade, but this is a decade when we've really seen it appear in so many mainstream apps and operating systems, and it's just great to give users a lot more choice and maybe a little easier on the eyes even if it doesn't actually help you sleep any better. My disappointment of the decade is the Facebook and Cambridge Analytica scandal. Obviously it did have an upside in that it highlighted just how companies like Facebook are using and potentially abusing the vast amount of data they have on us, but at the same time it was obviously hugely disappointing, and so many of us use Facebook as part of our everyday lives. It's so deeply interwoven in how we live. It's really difficult to escape from that kind of invasion into our privacy.
And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
My tech highlight of the decade has to be true wireless earbuds. We saw our very first pair in 2015 with the Onkyo W800BT, and since then the form factor has really taken off, and now we have noise cancelling, true wireless earbuds, and they're a very convenient way to listen to music. My biggest tech disappointment of the decade is 3D headphones. These are headphones that replicate the sound of a 3D space, but in my experience they sound really unnatural and they just can't beat the sound of a really good pair of over-ear open back headphones.
My tech highlight of the decade was the Nintendo Switch. The Switch brought together the best of Nintendo consoles in its first well-rounded machine in years. The Wii U was a bit of a disappointment. The 3DS was really good, but it was basically just a reprise of the DS with better graphics. The 3D element never really worked. The Switch bundles together everything that's great about Nintendo into one console, with like double the amount of games you'd normally get on a Nintendo home console. I thought portable gaming was dead outside of mobile, but it's really good that Nintendo managed to find a different angle on it that captured people's imaginations. That's why it's my highlight of the decade. My tech disappointment of the decade was the Kinect. Microsoft's Xbox peripheral that was designed to get people physically interacting with games, to give them a different method of interacting with the games they love, just ended up falling flat on its face because they made it a mandatory part of the Xbox One at launch and no one wanted it, and it kind of fizzled out at the start of the decade because they didn't make any genuinely interesting software with it. That kind of technology never really reached its full potential, and now whenever someone will launch a similar kind of device, it will seem gimmicky because they never managed to prove that it was anything but a gimmick, and I think that's a real problem. It's a shame, but yeah, if they'd have only just made a few classic games with it, I think it could have been a great bit of tech, but as it stands, I consider it a failure.
My highlight of the decade has been Windows 10. I used to work on Windows 8, the official magazine, so I know how poor some of the Windows releases have been. So when Windows 10 came along and actually fixed a lot of the problems, it was a very pleasant surprise. Unfortunately, my biggest disappointment of the decade is also Windows 10. Recently, Microsoft has released a number of updates which have actually broken more things than they fixed, and with each new update, more things seem to be causing problems, more wheels have been falling off, which is a real shame really. So although Windows 10 has been a lovely surprise to begin with, Microsoft in the future will need to keep on working to make sure that Windows 10 remains as good an operating system as it has the potential to be.